continue with a new session, and it's my pleasure to introduce Jamie Honke, who teaches Spanish at Ralston High School. And the title of her presentation, is The Art of Storytelling, How a Good Story Can Increase Engagement, Connect with Literacy, and Improve Comprehension.
There was a time when I was alone, nowhere to go and no place to call home. My only friend was the man in the moon, and even sometimes he would go away too. Then one night as I closed my eyes, I saw a shadow flying by. He came to me with the sweetest smile, told me he wanted to talk for a while. Said, Peter Pan, that's what they call me. I promise that you'll never be alone. And ever since that day, I'm a lost boy. I am a lost boy from Neverland, usually hanging out with Peter Pan. And when we're bored, we play in the woods, always on the run from Captain Hook. Run, run, lost boy, they say to me, away from all of reality. Neverland is home to lost boys like me, and lost boys like me are. He sprinkled me with pixie dust and told me to believe in him and believe in me. Soon enough we'll be in a cloud of green to your beautiful destiny. As we sort of love the town that never loved me, I realized I had a family. Soon enough we reach Neverland, peace will be like we hit the sand. And ever since that day, I'm a lost boy from Neverland, usually hanging out with Peter Pan. And when we're bored, we play in the woods, always on the run from Captain Hook. Run, run, lost boy, they say to me, away from all of reality. Neverland is home to lost boys like me, and lost boys like me are Peter Pan, Tinkerbell, and Wendy, darling. Even Captain Hook, you are my perfect storybook. Neverland, I love you so, and you are not my home, sweet home forever. A lost boy at last. Hello. That was the scariest part because I've never played the guitar in front of people before. And I have been playing the guitar for 1 year. I learned through YouTube. And so if I can do that, then you can tell a story to your students. Because it's terrifying at first, but the more you practice, and you can make mistakes, the more you start connecting with your students. So that song was called Lost Boy by Ruth B. This is me and my guitar. I started a year ago, and I tell my students that you have to try new experiences because of the stories that they bring you. I got my guitar, her name is Luna, because she's a Luna guitar, for Christmas because my first guitar I found in a dumpster. And it was too big, and my husband said, we need to get you a guitar that fits you. So we went to the Guitar Center, and I spent 2 hours. I played about 15 different guitars, and I found this one. Obviously, it was the last one I played because it was the one I fell in love with. So today I'm going to talk to you about the art of storytelling in your classes. I picked that song because it's about Peter Pan, and we all have experiences where we remember stories from our childhood or stories that we connect with and the emotional connection that they bring us. A little bit about me. I'm a Spanish teacher. My name is Jamie Honke. You can't really see that. I'm a Spanish teacher and the department chair for World Languages for Ralston High School. I teach Spanish 3, Spanish 4, AP Spanish 5, and then I'm in charge of the Spanish for Spanish Speakers program. We offer 2 classes of that. And then I also facilitate and mentor our novice level teachers for Spanish 1, Spanish 2, and the French program. I do not speak French. I received my degrees here at UNO and my national board certification in 2017. If you're interested in looking me up, Jamie Dempson Honke is my Facebook. There's 2 Jamie Honkes. Or you can find me on Twitter at RHS Honke or Rashonke. Okay, so I want to talk to you today first about what is comprehension-based instruction so that we can talk about storytelling. I base my instruction on whether or not my students can comprehend the messages that I'm sending to them. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then I'm going to tell you a story and talk about the elements of storytelling. As I was preparing this presentation and messaging Teresa on Facebook last night, I kept thinking, this is something we all know. So how do we take something we already know and apply it to what we do? Or maybe you've seen this in an English-based classroom or a literature-based classroom, but I'm not an English teacher. I didn't have English instruction, so, I went through school, but I don't have the qualifications to walk into a literature course and talk about storytelling. So how do we take what we know and make it explicit for our students so that we can foster second language acquisition or target language acquisition? And then we'll talk about how to engage, assess, lather, rinse, repeat with our students so that we build their proficiency. And then finally, I have a few screenshots of some writing samples from my students from last year and then from yesterday. So they haven't been scored yet. Okay, so a few things. Language is a mental representation that is outside of our awareness. I took a lot of these quotes or paraphrases from Bill Van Patten, who is a theorist on second language acquisition. And he mentions a lot about input being considered the messages that we receive, that we have to interpret and negotiate for meaning. So when we talk about storytelling, our primary message is moving the story along. The language we use to facilitate it is going to be what our students are negotiating for meaning. And then comprehension-based instruction has to be compelling to our students, which is why I decided to play a song at the beginning, because I thought maybe you guys are going, why is that crazy person with a guitar sitting in the front? It has to be relevant to the person that you're reaching, as we heard in our keynote speaker's presentation, and it has to be understandable and focused on input, what your learner is receiving, so that eventually our goal is output. So we have to make sure that they can understand the messages that we're putting out there. Okay, so Bill Van Patten says input and output are not techniques, they're foundations of language acquisition. So keeping that in mind, when we talk about the storytelling technique, we're focusing on input, which is a foundation of acquisition. Comprehensible input is the acquisition of language through messages that are capable of being negotiated for meaning. And a few things about storytelling. So I was texting Teresa last night. I was like, oh my God, I don't know if this presentation is going to go well. And she said, storytelling is as old as time. It's compelling. It's how we're wired, how we maintain our identity, and provides the context in which we live. We hear stories through song, we see them visually through art, we see them visually through theater and through motion picture. Everyone has a story. And one thing that I take from storytelling when I'm talking to my students is that I live by stories. Whatever I do in life, I want to be able to tell a cool story about it later. So whether it's how I learned, how I bought, or how I received my guitar, to how I how my husband proposed to me, I always hope it's a cool story because they're timeless and they're relevant and they're compelling. Cecile DeMille said, the greatest art in the world is the art of storytelling. And Margaret Atwood, who wrote The Handmaid's Tale, said, you're never going to kill storytelling because it's built in the human plan. We come with it. So how do we express our experiences? I want you to think of a time when you wanted something you couldn't have. So and it doesn't have to be the most profound thing, but think of a time when you wanted something and you couldn't have it. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to think about it so that you don't think of a profound story. 9, 10. Okay, do you have the thing in your head? Turn to a neighbor, and I want you to share, if you're comfortable, hopefully you kept this school appropriate, a time when you wanted something and you couldn't have it. I'm going to tell you my experience. I was trying to lose weight, and I had given up my favorite food, which was pizza. And I wanted pizza. And my husband ordered a pizza, and I started crying because I wanted the pizza and I couldn't have the pizza. That was my experience. Okay, so the person who, turn to your neighbor, the person who is tallest, you're going to share your experience first. The person who is shortest, you're going to share your experience. If there's a group of 3, it's okay.
It's not hard to think of anything. I don't know. But I don't have anything profound. I think maybe like I'm just gonna go back to my first car, and I inherited families again, and I really wanted something nice. Super made and shallow, which I don't want the 18-year-old car. I want something nicer. I was just like, yeah, that's legit. That's better than mine.
Tap your neighbor. When you're done, tap your neighbor. No, behind you.
Oh. Yeah. Tell her. Yeah. So we need to add. Must be appropriate. Don't. It's working. Okay, hold on. Sorry.
Awesome, thank you. In my classroom, I have a sign, and I use a visual where I don't do the tap your neighbor thing. I usually walk to the sign and wait for my student to yell taco, and then everyone quiets down. So, would anyone like to share? And all I want you to share out is what you wanted that you couldn't have. Anyone want to share? Yes.
Skyping my boyfriend because the internet was broken.
Oh, she wanted to Skype her boyfriend, but she couldn't because the internet was broken. She did not have the internet. Anyone else? Yes.
Graduating college and realizing at the end that I wanted to be a teacher and then didn't know how to go about that.
Oh, that's awesome. He wanted to be a teacher, but he didn't know how to be a teacher. That's double verbs together if you guys are thinking grammar. Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
I wanted to go to Japan this summer, but we don't have the money.
Oh, pobrecita. Jamie wanted to go to Japan, but she didn't have money or time because she's a teacher. Let's give dos aplausos por la clase. 1, 2, 3. Bien. Okay. So we could take all of those experiences, the 3 that we heard, plus my love of pizza, and we could put them into the art of storytelling. This is not brand new information. Like Piper, I tend to steal things and ideas, and then I'm like, how can I make them work in my classroom? And I thought to myself when I was teaching my Spanish for Spanish speakers class, my first year, it had 0 curriculum to it. The teacher who left took everything and left me with some textbooks that were not very good. So I decided to turn Spanish for Spanish speakers into Spanish language arts. So what did I know about Spanish language arts? And then I took that and I applied it to my non-Spanish speaker courses in a more novice level way. So here's what we need, and I'll go through this a little bit. Every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? If you think of The Lion King, which I'm starting to find out that young adults do not know what that is. So hopefully this new movie will help them. Okay? In The Lion King, there was a
Lion.
There was a lion who lived in
Africa.
in the Pride, okay? Yep. The lion cub was named
Simba.
and he had a father whose name was
Mufasa.
okay. And they were happy because he was going to be king. He didn't know if he wanted to be king. Okay, so there's some background to his character and his identity, right? And then there's a problem. What happened in The Lion King? One day, there was a stampede, and who died? Mufasa died. And then if you want to take this into like an analysis of The Lion King, Simba had an internal conflict of himself versus his role in society. And then he went away, and he met two people that helped him, named Rosencrantz and and then they came back, and he fought Scar, and the end, right? So he had some rising action. What's the climax of the movie in Lion King? Anybody know?
We find out it was Scar's fault?
No. Kind of, but no.
He decides to be king.
Kind of, but no. I think Stephanie really wants to tell me.
I really want to tell you, it's a guess though, because Nate watches this every day. Is it the scene where Simba is at the water pool and he sees his reflection as his father and realizes he must return?
No. It is the scene, but that was a fantastic answer, and I forgot about that scene. It's still part of the rising action. It's the scene where Simba fights Scar, because everything that happens after that is your falling action and resolution. So he defeats Scar as his climax. All of the deciding who I am as a cub, as a lion, is part of the rising action and the internal conflict. Okay, so now I'm not suggesting that if you walk into a Spanish 1 class, you're like, okay, kids, today we're going to talk about climax and descending action and resolution. But if you have this framework in your mind, telling stories become easier, more compelling, and more relevant. Okay, so in the song that I sang, there was a boy who had nobody, and then one day he was swept away by Peter Pan, and he decided, once he landed, that was the climax of the story. He now decided he is a lost boy forever, right? So keeping in mind these elements of a story, you can start to make storytelling comprehensible to students, and you can start to build relevant stories. And then when you move to the output phase, where you're expecting students to retell stories to you, they don't get as lost because they know the elements of the story. I was really thinking back to the keynote presentation about how the top-down approach was providing that schema. That was like, this works, right? Because if you have the context about a story, then storytelling becomes more comprehensible and you can make it more relevant. You can also tap into cognitive academic language proficiency later on and talk about elements of literature with your students, right? Like in Spanish class, ¿qué es el conflicto? There are a lot of cognates in that. And then you front load it and you talk about it with your students. Okay, so here's the process. You describe a setting, you describe a character in the scene. So when I think back to my lower level Spanish days, we talked a lot about adjectives, we talked a lot about where they live, we talk about their name, how they're feeling. So your basic front loading of describing a character is the description of the character in the scene. Who's in their family? What do they like to do? Things like that. So the description of the character in the scene. Okay, in a novice level classroom, and maybe even in an upper level classroom, your problem is focused around high frequency vocabulary. Like they have something or they don't have something. They need something or they don't need something. So like Simba has a pretty deep problem. He has an important role he has to fill in society. Okay, but you could have a cat that has no food. Like it could be as simple as you need it to be for your level of learner. They have something, they need something, they want something. They have a problem. Their problem is they need a coat because it's cold and they want to go to the store to get a coat, okay? And you could ask your students for this, but if they don't have the language, you can also provide options for your students to establish a problem. A common problem that my students like to express is has no friends. That's a lot of the stories. They have no friends. Why do they have no friends? And then it goes from there. They have no friends because their head is too big. Okay, well, we'll work from that. In as I move my students from basic novice level proficiency towards intermediate, we start exploring themes like, do they have high self-esteem or do they have low self-esteem? Let's talk about their geography, like where they live. Let's talk more about the aspects of where they live to base more real-world characters. I don't like the word real world, but to base more realistic characters instead of a corn dog that's in love with a ketchup packet, which was a story last year. Or like we had a story where they wanted to talk about a bunny who was named Cardi. I just found out about Cardi B last year because of a bunny named Cardi B who was being taken advantage of by her record producer. So we talked about like what that looks like in society and power dynamics through our characters. Usually they have something, they need something, they want something, or they don't have something, and they need it. Okay. So when you think of high-frequency vocabulary and you want to bring it down to a novice level, they go somewhere, they see someone, they talk to them, they either solve their problem or they don't. Lather, rinse, repeat. Okay, so Simba has a problem. His dad died. That's also a common problem that students come up with in stories. Their parents died. Oh, okay. And then they accuse me of sad stories, but like they're the ones who come up with it. Okay, so Simba's dad died. Where did he go?
Away.
Oh, he went away. Great, because I don't know where he went either. He went away. He escaped. He went somewhere else. Who did he see? Timon and Pumbaa.
Outcasts.
And what did Timon and Pumbaa say to him?
Hakuna Matata.
Hakuna Matata. It means no worries. Yep. Okay, did Timon and Pumbaa solve his problem?
No.
No. Then he saw who?
Rafiki?
He saw Rafiki,
His girlfriend.
and he saw Nala.
No.
So we'll fast forward. He goes home. He goes back. And then he solves his problem. So in a feature-length film, you go somewhere, you see someone, you talk, you do a thing over and over and over and over until you get to a resolution. It could be as simple as one snippet of go, see, talk, done, or it could be multiple, lather, rinse, repeat. I saw my husband, I cried. I said to my husband, I want the pizza. My husband said, if you need it, eat it. I ate the pizza and solved the problem. I didn't lose weight, but that's okay, because sometimes you need the pizza. Okay, this is a lot of information, but I thought last night, how can I put this in a way that I might use this in class. It's kind of like a Mad Libs. There was a blank who was named blank. He or she was tall and had long hair and blue eyes. She liked to play the guitar. She had a problem. She wanted to play the guitar, but she could not play the guitar, so she needed to learn in order to play the guitar. One of the things I take from this storytelling technique of establishing basic structures that you might use later on is that with my students who are in AP and they have to give cultural comparisons or they have to narrate, they can use the same structure of a basic storytelling experience, but change the details so that they are culturally relevant details. Okay, so she lived in a city that was named Corpus Christi. Corpus Christi was or is, if you're starting to mix your tenses, because Corpus Christi is still a city in Texas. Corpus Christi is in Texas. The city was big and had people, places, and things. I'm just kind of making up what I'm putting in the blank.
I love this because to me this is less like a cloze activity and more like a novice version of a writing prompt.
Yes.
Basically.
Now, I do not do this out, like I don't put this on the board for my students. This is just for this presentation. But when I'm trying to build a story with my students, this is in my head, and this is kind of how I frame my verbiage when I'm talking and communicating with my students. Yes.
Do you have this as a template in Spanish?
Okay, so here's an example that I wrote last night. Había una mujer. There was a woman que se llamaba Selena, that was named Selena. Selena era de los Estados Unidos y era latina. Selena was from the United States and was Latina. A ella le gustaba cantar y bailar. She liked to sing and dance. Now, it's probably tuvo un problema, but I was really nervous. Selena tenía un problema. Quería cantar en inglés. She wanted to sing in English. Pero ella no era famosa ni popular. She wasn't famous, nor was she popular in the English-speaking community. Necesitaba ser popular para cantar en inglés. She needed to be popular so that in order to sing in English. That's a very simplified version of Selena's story for the purpose of this presentation. Vivía en una ciudad que se llamaba Corpus Christi. She lived in a city named Corpus Christi. Corpus Christi está en Texas. So I switched tenses here because Corpus Christi is still in Texas. Y es una ciudad grande. Okay, one of the things I encounter is how do you switch time periods, which is an intermediate skill, and how do you incorporate grammar in storytelling when you're delivering messages. It's Costa Rica. And I use that through dialogue, and I use that through the detail. So she went to her father. She saw her father and talked to him. I want to sing in English, said Selena. You need to sing in Spanish first, he responded. So we have intermixing tenses, subjects, so they get an idea of how everything can kind of work together. Yes.
It's a really good place to put commands as well.
Yes, commands. You can also incorporate subjunctive later on, because you could say, su padre quería que cantara en inglés primero. Her father wanted that she sing in English first. So when you can shelter the vocabulary, but you don't shelter the grammar through storytelling, you can deliver more comprehensible messages through this. One thing I would say, though, is that I'm showing the whole story to you, but I don't show the whole story to my students first, because I don't want them to focus on how do I read this, I'm trying to build their auditory skills. So how I might present it is maybe a picture of Selena, and I say, I will establish meaning for the major words I think they need to know. Like I might write había una mujer, and I do something called volleyball volleyball translate. I made up the word, and Teresa will say había means there was, and Larissa will say una mujer means a girl, like 2 seconds, and then we eventually remove that scaffolding. So that by the time they read this, they should know it. Like they should already have heard these messages over and over, that they don't have to translate every single word when they get there. How I would present it is something like, clase, había una mujer. Había una mujer, sí or no?
Sí.
Sí. Había una mujer o un hombre?
Mujer.
Una mujer, sí. Había un hombre?
No.
Había una mujer.
Sí.
¿Qué había?
Una mujer.
Okay? So you start building in the questioning so that they hear the message over and over. The more the students receive practice with this, the more you can go through questions faster and they respond and move along. Okay, so how do I make this comprehensible? I establish meaning before they start. I might use high-frequency word practice through Quizlet flashcards. I'm not a word list type teacher, but I don't have a problem with showing them words before they begin. That's a little bit deconstructed so that they're not constantly thinking, había means what? Una mujer means what? What does that mean? They've just seen it before. They don't have to memorize it. They've just seen it before so that it makes it a little bit easier for them. And Teresa and I were talking about that's kind of that bottom approach where you want to make sure that they've seen it. And then I do frequent checks for understanding throughout. Like when I was asking you a question, you were responding to me. I could tell that you understood what I was asking you. You at least knew what the question was asking you and how to respond to it. And if I think you don't know what I'm saying, I'll stop and say, like, ¿Cómo se dice había una mujer? There was a woman. Okay, we can move on. So frequent checks for understanding. Most of the time they're verbal, or I'll have them go through circling through questioning. I already know I can kind of figure out my students who need a little bit more support, so I might go to them, what's una mujer? A girl? Okay, you're good, I got you. And I keep an eye on them to make sure they know what's going on. I also do this through classroom management. You must have your head up and paying attention because I don't know what this means. I don't know if this means you're listening to me or not. I don't require students to write things down unless they feel like they need to. I have some students who take pages and pages and pages of notes. I have some students who don't. So I check through other methods, how they understand. Formative, I call it the moment of truth. The moment of truth is an exit quiz. I make it up as I go. Honestly, I don't make it up before class starts. That might not be the best practice my principal wants me to follow, but I don't want to think like, okay, you're going to get here by the end of the period. If we end up going off track and talking about Gaudí, I might ask you a question about Gaudí. So my moment of truth exit quizzes are usually true or false questions, who, what, when, where, why questions that I ask the students. They write down, and if they're following it, like almost all my students pass them with flying colors. The ones who don't, I know I need to focus on them. At times, I'll pause and I'll have students retell what they just heard to their partner, where they might say, había una mujer, la mujer vivía en Corpus Christi, and just retell, and then I walk around and listen to see what mistakes they might be making or what they're not clear on. And then I use digital formative assessments, like a website called Quiz. You can put questions in and they answer them. You could play Kahoot. There's 2 versions of Kahoot. There's the multiple choice Kahoot. There's also a jumble Kahoot where you can put sentences in and it jumbles the words and they have to put the sentences in order. They hate that one, but I love it because it really makes them look at the language. They hate it because they don't like dragging and dropping. That's the only reason they don't like it. And then Quizlet, I use Quizlet for sentence stems. I'll put había una mujer que vivía and then the answer is Corpus Christi. Or ¿cómo se llamaba la mujer Selena? Where they have comprehension questions through Quizlet. Okay, so this is the last part. So every 2 weeks, I assess my students using something called a timed write. These students this is a Spanish 3 student. I ask them, do you want me to write corrections? And they almost always say yes, so that's why my writing is all over it. But this was a student retelling a story about a scarecrow that was lonely. This is a writing that I told the students, here are the elements that I'd like to see in a story. Description, problem, they go somewhere, they do something, they say something, they see someone, how they solve their problem, conclusion. If you get lost, look at the board and see where you are in your storytelling process and maybe add another character, add another conflict, add another problem. So this story is about a girl who wanted a dress to dance, but she went to the mall. And this is about a scarecrow who had no friends. I noticed that the more I focused on this type of storytelling framework, my students were making fewer grammatical mistakes. Their fluency was increasing. They were trying to take more risks with making longer sentences and incorporating more ideas. And in my 10 years of teaching, I switched to this method 2 years ago. I started seeing students not asking to use notes. Like they wouldn't even argue, can I look this up? What does this mean? They just put what they know on the paper. And I saw a drastic increase in the amount that students could write versus the amount that students sat and thought about what to write and were nervous most of the time. So this was last year. Can't really read it because I kind of just threw it together. This is yesterday. So we're right in this phase in my Spanish 3 class where they haven't had any past tense instruction, or maybe they did, but it's been a year since they've had the language because we're on 4 block. So we started in January. Their last class was last January. So this is where they're starting after we've been doing storytelling for a little while. And I told them that they could try to work with tenses however they want. What I'm noticing is that this student is staying primarily in the present tense, but this tiene, he's trying to shift to the imperfect. He doesn't quite know how to do it yet. Same thing here. I've been noticing more tiene, but I think they're trying to shift to the past because they're writing tiene in other places. So I really believe that, like, as I'm telling stories and as we're working through this, it's improving their proficiency and their fluency.
Jamie,
Yes.
I don't understand that format. What are you doing there with all these lines?
The lines are for word counts, and that's just to make it easier to read. But so the side, on this side,
You can kind of see it.
the first line is
Oh, yeah.
5 words. So if they want to keep track of their word count, they can.
All right,
That's just a formatting thing.
thanks.
Here they were also keeping track of their words, but they wrote it on notebook paper, so they often got frustrated because they'd have to count a lot, and this just makes it easier for them.
Do you ever have an expectation on the amount of words?
My goal is 100, but it's an arbitrary goal. It's just to keep their pen moving. So most of the time, they have 10 minutes. I play sad cello music, and they have 10 minutes to just write me a story and try to keep your pen or pencil moving. So I have some students who don't hit the 100-word mark, but they're trying to hit the 100-word mark. I have some students who are already at 300 words. It just depends on the student. My goal for them is try to tell me a story, try to make sense, and try to be comprehensible so that I can read it. Jamie.
Add something to that. My students, I've also started having them set, thinking back to last time we wrote, how many words did you get? How are you feeling today? What's your goal for today?
Yeah.
And then try to meet it.
And being more individualized. Because I'm finding that 100 words is just a number. It doesn't actually mean anything about their level of proficiency or their fluency. It's just a number. Yes.
So I love the activities and how engaging they are and interactive. And so I was thinking, we were introducing the topic, talking about cognitive input and output. And I would say that the activities that you present go way beyond that. And it's important to remember that we're looking for that type of negotiation and engagement. And I think the activities get to that. And that's really important because that's where the learning happens. You know, when there's that engagement, even in storytelling, we're not just using language, but we are, always interacting, negotiating. If somebody doesn't understand what I'm saying, I have to, reintroduce the idea in a different way. And that's where learning happens.
Yes.
When we have that type of negotiation for meaning that we call. And that goes precisely what we're trying to accomplish when we talk about actual and intermediate levels, which is this ability to narrate and negotiate. So I think it goes way beyond the cognitive input and output, which we know now that doesn't lead so much to learning as this type of interaction that we are trying to accomplish when those things are combined and that negotiation happens, which you presented in your presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions? Thank you very much. I think I want to